Thank you very much, and thank you guys so much for coming out this evening. Nice to see a good turnout. I want to thank Nikolai DePippa for giving you a little encouragement last night to realize how important this discussion was. So thanks for being here. First off, I want to give you guys a little background on the American Red Cross, because what we know is that everyone has their own perception of what they think Red Cross does, depending on their interaction or what they've heard or what they have been told about what we do. So quickly, the American Red Cross serves fewer than 3 million people across Arkansas, plus more than 43,000 neighbors in eastern Oklahoma. We have 1,200 trained and dedicated volunteers who stand ready to instruct you, regardless of your age, in disaster education and to respond to the call for help any time of the day or night, or weekends, and even on Super Bowl, or if we ever make it to a BCS championship, they'll respond. Red Cross in Arkansas covers 73 counties. Little River County is served by the Northeast Texas Red Cross. Crittenden County is served by the Mid-South chapter in Memphis. And we also take care of the Sequoia County in Oklahoma. And having said that, when I say we have regions, it's purely more internal. If something happens in New York, as it is with Sandy right now, we will respond, and we have had Arkansans on the ground there since the beginning of Superstorm Sandy. And likewise, we have had volunteers from around the country come into Arkansas numerous times for our large-scale disasters. The American Red Cross touches the life of an Arkansan every 5 minutes through response to a residential fire, which is our #1 disaster response, weather-related or man-made disasters, with health and safety instruction and the donation of the gift of blood. Also with learned first aid and health skills to prevent harm and to save lives, as well as the connection of loved ones here to their family members in the military, stateside, or anywhere in the world, even in spite of Twitter and Facebook. We respond to 1,500 disasters each year in Arkansas. The majority of those are residential fires, and we touch more than 40,000 people across the state annually with health and safety and disaster preparedness skills. From a 3-year deployment of hundreds of Red Cross volunteers to Arkansas for the Great Flood in 1917 to feed tens of thousands after obviously everything was devastated there, to care and emotional support to surviving families after the American Airlines Flight 420 from Dallas to Fort Worth crashed at the Little Rock National Airport, which what happened as a result of a recently passed law that the National Transportation Safety Board determined that the Red Cross would be the lead caregiver after concerns from family members of previous years that their needs were not being met, and we were the first ones to unfortunately have to implement that care, which we gladly did. We were also there for emotional support and response to our first responders in the 2010 flash flooded Camp Albert Pike that killed more than 20 campers. Red Cross trained volunteers provide reciprocal response to large-scale disasters from Hurricane Katrina, Isaac, and as I mentioned, Superstorm Sandy, where we are still deploying workers to our residential fires that we respond to an average of 4 times a day, every day, around the clock in Arkansas. Our home fires, the high number of them, place Arkansas in the top 3 for the Federal Emergency Agency's list of high fire fatalities. The majority of those victims are children under 12, and we can't emphasize enough how important fire safety is. Red Cross care to individuals affected by fire is similar to that we do in large-scale disasters. Emergency shelter, a smart card for food and clothing, professional volunteer emotional support is also provided, as well as financial support, which we have to do more often than we'd like when funeral arrangements are needed to be made. All of that support is provided at no cost by individuals such as you and by generous corporate support. And as Skip mentioned, the Clinton School has been extremely generous to us, as well as those who have attended their functions there. And for that, we are grateful. We are not a government agency. We are tasked by Congress to respond to large-scale disasters, but we are not funded to do so. So we thank you for your continued support that enables us to do that. Tonight, we wanted to talk about disaster preparedness, what it means to the people who are going to participate in the panel, and then what it may also mean to you. So at this time, I'm going to bring our panel out so you can see their bright, shiny faces. So first is Executive Director with Verizon Wireless, Leo Perreault, who is also Chairman of the Board of the American Red Cross of Greater Arkansas. Our next panelist is probably someone you haven't really heard about recently, and that would be President and CEO of Entergy Arkansas Incorporated, Hugh McDonald. And last but not least is Executive Director of the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management, David Maxwell. So before we start the panel, we're going to do a little Q&A with you guys, and I'm going to ask you to be honest. We're not going to do anything to you, just it's a way to purge your soul. So we'll get the first elephant out of the room. How many of you lost power during Christmas? Okay, so did anybody lose power last night? Okay, is that not an improvement? What can you say? Okay, so everyone's gotten that taken care of. Since most of you lost power during the holidays, have you taken steps to prevent that, as humanly possible as that is, for the next ice storm? One hand, two hands? Okay. Okay. How many of you were aware that we were under severe threat yesterday? Good. How many of you have Red Cross apps on your phones? I just thought I'd ask that. Just to see. Okay. How many of you have a gallon of water for each person in your household for 5 days? Okay. Okay. If an incident occurred tonight and you had to shelter in place, which means you can't leave the house and you really need to kind of seal the house up, would you be in a position to do that for 48 hours? Means if you're on meds, you're not down to the last pill today, you've got infants in the house, not down to the last diaper. How many of you are cell-only households? Cell phone only. Okay. You've made Leo happy. He likes that. How many of you have pets? How many of you have emergency plans for your pets? Okay, you don't have to hang your head, it's okay. How many of you have children under the age of 18? Okay, and of those, how many of you have current emergency contact lists with their schools? Okay. And how many believe a New Madrid earthquake will occur in the next 20 years? Is that good?
No.
Okay.
I'm hoping for 30.
So tell you what, we're going to start out, and we're going to leave time for Q&A also. But one of the things we want to talk about, and we'll start out with David, is talking about New Madrid. That's something high on the priority with Red Cross. We have been meeting with it. The gentlemen up here and their organizations meet about it, talk about it, plan about it. So the question I'll ask David is, what would we expect in eastern Arkansas? What would we expect? What would be the implications for us in central Arkansas?
And I have a great answer for that. It depends. But it really does depend. There's thousands of variables. And depending on where the earthquake is, how strong the earthquake is, all of those kind of things really have major impact on what happens. But we're dealing with, for our planning, we're looking at a 7.7, 7.8 in Arkansas. That would create something in the neighborhood of 300,000 homeless people needing shelter. The demand on hospitals outside of the area would truly be overwhelming. You're looking at, with an earthquake that size, more than likely no power in the western United States not just western Arkansas, for a period of time. Certainly no power in eastern Arkansas for a good long time. Roads, the other variable is what bridges stay up, what bridges go down, and that's all. You can retrofit, but there's liquefaction that can occur that would drop the roads out. So, yeah, I say that if we have bridges and we can drive into the area, we have a heck of a big disaster. If we lose bridges and we're dependent on rotor wing aircraft to get in, helicopters to get into the area, we have a catastrophe. It's going to be a catastrophe no matter what. But is that a dire enough scenario?
So the question is, when you say a certain amount of time we'd be without power or it would be bad, what are we talking about in Arkansas? When you say the western part of the country, what are you looking at?
A matter of weeks. In eastern Arkansas, could be much longer than that. And Hugh can talk to this. There's transformers that are not easily replaced. Some of them take 6 months to build, and there's none in the pipeline. So if those generators go out, then it's going to be longer. The other thing that you have to always think about with the New Madrid event is that more than likely, if you look back at history, it's not a single event. In 1811, 1812, there were 3 events of that size, of that magnitude. So, and the ground literally shook for 100 days. And so, can you make repairs to infrastructure with the ground still shaking? There's a lot of challenges.
Can you explain, you mentioned the liquefaction, explain what that means.
Okay, liquefaction is as the ground shakes, and you can do this with a sand pail. We've all played building sand castles and all, but if as it gets wet and you shake it, it'll eventually the pressure builds and the water has to find somewhere where to go, and it'll find the weakest place to go. So you get sand boils, but then you lose support from the ground. It just it won't support a structure that's on it. So it really turns to liquid.
So Hugh, one of the things I've heard a lot of people talk about recently, and obviously when we're looking at something like New Madrid, obviously it's extremely catastrophic. But one of the things a lot of people talked about during the Christmas holiday is you realize how dependent you are on electricity, and that probably the more urban you are, the shorter your ability to be independent is without it. So having said that, what recommendations would you do for us for future? What planning, what should we be thinking about? Because I'd say in the last few years we've had some very interesting disasters, and a lot of them have had their own nuances that no one expected. So what should we as individuals think about in preparation?
Geez, good question. You know, the storms that we've been involved in that probably everybody here remembers, you know, dating back 10, 12 years ago, they're, you know, like 7-day events. And, you know, our experience is that after about the 3rd day without power, without lights, customers really start getting upset, putting it lightly. And, you know, one interesting example of that I got from just this last storm, a person who lived in town was out for I think 5 days, maybe 6 days, and had children, and while they could travel, they could get out of the house, you know, they were concerned about food. They used their grill to cook, but after a while, he says, he really started to get afraid of how long will this, how long can we live like this, as a family. So, you don't really think about this, but the whole sense of fear actually starts entering probably, day 5 or day 6, especially if you have young children, on how to deal with that. I guess in terms of recommending to customers what to prepare for, it depends on what season it's in, I guess, winter versus summer. And I really don't want to say this to all go out and buy generators. And I don't take that lightly, because, we want to make sure that, our reliability is reasonable, or is reliable, and we keep the lights on. And when there is a disaster, 7 days is about, we do everything we can to get the lights on within a week. I think all the storms that we've faced that are really, really bad, that was the outside limit. This last storm was pretty much everybody, 95, 98% got on within 6 days. So, I don't know if I did, is that helpful?
That does help. So in that vein, I'll go to Leo. Seeing that the audience seems to mirror statistics that I've seen, that Arkansas is becoming actually one of the top states that is cellular only. And obviously, to a point, you need electricity. So if you're looking at a disaster or an emergency and your power is interrupted, then what should a cellular only family think about? Should power be interrupted? And obviously, that's your sole form of communication.
Sure. So, it is interesting that the United States is trending towards cellular only. And for many, many years, of course, people thought of as their landline telephone was always there for them. And, regardless of power, you picked up the phone and you had dial tone, right? And more in this day of, what they call voice over IP, you in fact do have to have power for some of the new technology to work, whether you're buying service from a cable provider or whether you're buying a voice over IP technology from, the ILEC, AT&T in parts of this area, as well as the rural ILECs in Arkansas. So it is interesting that everybody's moving to wireless. Obviously, there's a convenience factor, and as mobile as the industry is, as mobile as the population has become, I think a lot of people feel like they don't really need their home phone because they're not there very often. And most people call them on their cell phone anyway. So, obviously there are cost implications of having both. So, I think the steps that someone would need to consider if they're a cellular-only household would be that we get warning for some disasters, and obviously you don't get warning for something like an earthquake. So it makes it even more important to have a plan around your wireless communications. Simple ones would be that you'd always want to have a car charger. You used to say in 5-10 years ago that you want to have extra batteries, but in this day and age where the batteries are built into the phone, and many of them you can't just take them out, it's even more important to have things like, what we call a power pack. And what that power pack is something that you charge, obviously, in advance, and then as your battery drains, you can plug it into your phone and it recharges your phone's battery. So, there are steps that I think are important around making sure you're prepared if, in fact, wireless communications is your only form of communications.
Let me ask, tagging on to that, in the event of something along the line of Sandy, or I think Haiti was a good example, cell use was critical to those affected by the earthquake there. How should we use the telephone when there's something major? And it could be a tornado, it could be a flood, it could be an incident at a school where now you can instantly see what's happening in California or in Paris because of 24-hour news. So how should we use that so that it's beneficial to us as well as emergency
Right. So
responders?
I think the world has become connected all the time, right? You're always accessible. And that's vastly different than the way it used to be. So When something does happen, the first reaction of someone is to immediately pick up their cell phone and start calling relatives and loved ones to check on them, and that's understandable. I think the recommendation that we continue to express to the population is that for several reasons. First off is you want to save your battery on your wireless devices as much as possible, because you don't know when the next time is you're going to have access. If you're mobile, it doesn't, regardless of whether there's power at your home or not, if you're mobile, you still may not be able to get to power. So, you know, saving the charge on your mobile devices is important. You know, we build the network with a lot of excess capacity in it. We build it and engineer it, you know, for the very busiest hour of the week and month, so that every other time of the week and day and month, you know, there's plenty of capacity. But in a situation like that, there's frankly no way that a network can keep up with the immediate capacity that's thrown on the network. So what we recommend to folks is that you use the text messaging as much as possible. Data communications has a better opportunity to access the network when it's available. When you think about the internet and when you think of information that's flowing across these pipes, if you want to think of it that way, data has a way to do that when the network's available. When you make a voice call, it's either available at that moment or it's not. And so we encourage people to use text messaging and the new data applications that are available to make contact with loved ones. The other reason for that is it takes the voice communication lines, and hopefully it's reserving it for those emergency responders and those that are truly in need of talking to somebody, whether it's a 911 call, or somebody's, just really in danger and they need to make a voice call as opposed to a text. So if you're making contact with friends and relatives and checking on things, we encourage text messaging to reserve the network for those that are truly in a situation where they need to make a voice contact.
David, when you had Hurricane Isaac, Sandy, and I'm sure there have been incidents here too, where I think it's safe to say we have a pretty sophisticated weather predictions. And with Sandy, there was repeated statements by local and national meteorologists that this storm was not being hyped, that it was different than other storms, and it was going to indeed be what it was being predicted to be. Mandatory evacuations were given, and people still didn't heed the warnings. So then when it hit, people were surprised that they were standing in 6 feet of water or whatever they were in. Why won't people heed the warning?
If I knew that, I would retire and form my own company. It's an interesting thing to ponder, because I think if you talk to people in New Orleans today, there are people that'll tell you they would not evacuate. And so, we as humans don't learn lessons very well. And, we always want to believe it's not going to happen to us. It's going to happen to those other guys, because it always happens to those other guys. And it hasn't happened to us yet. And getting that preparedness message out is really tough. I think the latest national survey I saw, 17% of the people self-identified that they had done anything as far as preparedness. And this is a survey where you could lie, and only 17% of the people say they've done anything. So it's a tough nut to crack for us. We continually put out preparedness messages. Have your supply kit, have a mobile supply kit, and what's in it, and all that. People today don't watch the news, and I'm beginning to think people never did. But and we're just saying that because I don't think the population's ever been real well prepared. But people don't hear the message, and we're trying. Red Cross has apps. We've got an app, readyarkansas.gov. If you want to download that, it's free. So we're trying text messaging, Twitter, all those things to try to get messages out. And it will always be a continual sales program to sell preparedness.
Yeah, if I could add on to what David said, one experience that we saw in Hurricane Isaac in New Orleans, that the officials were actually recommending many of them were saying shelter in place, as the hurricane didn't appear to be that bad, and it turned out to be a lot worse than it was, and there were significant outages out there. So many South Louisianans followed that guidance and stayed home, and it became a real challenge for us in restore and service at that point in time. Customers were in their homes for several days without power, up to a week without power, and their expectations were not nearly what they should have been at the beginning of the outage. So it caused real challenges for us, as well as problems with government officials. The social media, that was probably one of our major opportunities with social media, communicating with customers. We've learned a lot in that storm and implemented a lot of the social media communication with customers just in this last storm here in Arkansas over Christmas.
Do you want to add to that?
We have people from Louisiana that any storm that threatens the Gulf, they've come to Arkansas so many times that they'll actually call ahead to a shelter that they've been to in the past and try to reserve their spot. So.
Yes. We had people self-evacuate during Isaac to Jonesboro and Fayetteville, and we were asking why there is no evacuation to Arkansas, and they just enjoyed coming here, and they came back.
Just a little bit of trivia. Katrina, which actually did no physical damage in Arkansas, is money-wise, I think the third largest disaster we've had in the state.
On to when you mentioned people not coming, during Hurricane Gustav, which Red Cross hosted shelters here, when Governor Jindal instituted a mandatory evacuation for residents there, I think not wanting to get caught in another Katrina. And then once the storm hit, he also instituted a 2-day curfew to allow emergency crews and first responders to come in, which did not sit well, as you can imagine, with the folks here. But to your point, we had numerous people tell us that they would not have evacuated had it not been mandatory. And one of the things we do remind people and understand is that to evacuate costs money. There is a financial aspect to that. And someone had mentioned that if Katrina had not happened, that Katrina did happen, I think they said, on a payday week. And so those are things that you have to think about is building, as we're always talking about, building that emergency kit, reviewing your insurance policies. I personally, when I go to my insurance agent, I sit down, I don't just look at one, I'm not going to read all the fine print, but what I ask is, okay, if we have a tornado and I'm out for X number of weeks, will this take care of that? If X, Y, and Z happens, will this take care of that? And that's probably the sane way to do that. And I have heard an agent who, and this was after Katrina, who said he just dreaded going back home. He lost his home in Katrina, but dreaded going back home because he had a number of customers who had just gathered policies and they weren't covered because they weren't instituted in time, because you've got, I think, a 30-day window before a hurricane is predicted. You can't just run out and then all of a sudden go get insurance. And not that this person had done that for that purpose, but unfortunately they fell within that window of time from that standpoint. What will it take to get people, and this is maybe asking you the same question in a different way, one of the, I guess, curiosities is people look at Sandy, and obviously you have concern for the people who are there. I can't tell you how many calls we got from people saying, I can't take seeing this person on TV that I've seen who's doing X, Y, and Z, or who's not doing X, Y, and Z. what is it that will encourage people? I mean, are there any lessons learned when you have one large disaster versus another, or is it that's my one that I had, and so now I'm in the clear and the karma's straight and I'm okay?
Yeah, I think it happened to them.
Or it happened to me and
yeah,
I'm okay.
And it happened to me. It sure won't happen to me again. But you know, the thing that I think we all have to realize a couple things. One, probably no one in this room will go to a shelter.
Probably
Yeah.
not.
And in Arkansas, very few people go to shelters after any sort of disaster. We had warming shelters over Christmas. Very few people go. It's just in the nature of people of Arkansas. They just don't do it. But how do you plan for those people who aren't mobile, aren't financially able to go stay in a hotel or drive 2 states over to stay with their relatives or all of those kind of things that I warrant anyone in this room would be able to do. And so there's outside of the people that can be prepared, there's a lot of people that, you know, the message that we say, you know, have 3 days of water and food and all that just doesn't compute, because they're worrying about their next meal and water. You know, you turn the tap on and that's what they have. So, you know, there's a lot of challenges to this thing called preparedness.
And unfortunately, when you talk about something like New Madrid, it will impact a zone that is already struggling, which would be the Delta region.
Yeah, and yeah, it hopefully the new steel mill will help. Put a plug in for my boss. He did a wonderful job recruiting.
You did good. You get good points there. Tell you what, why don't we open it up to questions? Because I'm going to imagine a couple of you have. Yes, sir, in the back. I think they want you to wait for a microphone.
I was wondering if you could comment on what lessons were learned from 2 major earthquakes that hit not too long ago on the West Coast. The first being the earthquake that hit during a World Series in the San Francisco area, and what was learned from a highly populated area about crowd control and hysteria in the Northridge earthquake in suburban Los Angeles. Is there anything that we learned from that about how to provide some of the necessary things that people need, such as food and water? And do we have enough law enforcement to protect the people and provide for public safety?
We learn lessons. It's hard to translate the California experience to the central U.S. And I'm not talking about the demographics or their population. It's earthquakes behave extremely differently in California than they do in the central U.S. The urban areas that we have in Arkansas that could be impacted by a New Madrid event aren't that major of urban areas. There's Jonesboro, West Memphis, Blytheville, some of those areas that really don't compare to Los Angeles. Or Seattle, if you look at a couple other earthquakes. As far as lessons learned on resources, we've come a long way in the last 10 years or so. The Emergency Management Assistance Compact is a compact that every state is a member of. It's a state-to-state agreement that we can reach out and once a governor declares a disaster, we can reach out and request anything that any of the other states have. In Katrina, we sent a bunch of National Guard troops to both Louisiana and Mississippi. I anticipate that we would be asking for a lot of National Guard troops to come to Arkansas, along with regular Army, regular Air Force, full-time soldiers. But the law enforcement would be possible. The food supplies, we work on contracts almost daily to ensure that we have things in place that we can reach out and get commodities and get it into areas. With a new is that you're looking at a rural environment that with people spread out and maybe no transportation outside of the major hubs of the area. So the traditional thing of creating pods or points of distribution where you say in the county seat and you bring supplies into the county seat, it's going to be tough to get the supplies out to all the people. So do you bring the people into a certain area? Do you evacuate the whole area? It's there's once again, depending on the damage to the infrastructure, the roads, is really going to depend or really drive how we respond to those events.
Yes, in the blue sweater.
You mentioned earlier that a major earthquake along the New Madrid would interrupt power supplies in the western United States. We have a nuclear power plant out by Russellville. How far would the liquefaction go? Is that a source of concern?
No, and actually there's especially after the Japanese event or the Japan event. The NRC has looked very closely at nuclear power plants and earthquake preparedness, and Russellville is really further outside of the zone than we would expect liquefaction or really major shaking.
Let me just say, we do have a Red Cross earthquake app that you can download to your phone. You can go to your app store, and you can put your locations, and you may be stunned how many earthquakes. Mine is set to, for any frequency, 2.5 or greater. You can pick how high or low you want to go, and you can put in your destinations. I have Little Rock, Jonesboro, and Oklahoma City. And you're surprised how often there are ones.
Does anyone know where College City, Arkansas is? College City? It stumped me. They had a 2.2 yesterday. It's in Lawrence County. Mm-hmm. Just north of Walnut Ridge.
Oh.
I'm a Red Cross nurse as well as my colleague Joy here, and I've been traveling around the state and actually outside of the state teaching people to prepare for disasters. And I've accumulated 3 huge boxes of things to show, one of which is a Red Cross radio, weather radio, emergency radio, that has a crank, so you don't need to keep replacing the battery, and it charges your cell phone.
Right.
So you can get that through the Red Cross, and it supports the Red Cross. The other thing we're doing is preparing nursing students all over the United States to serve as disaster volunteers. And we started doing it here, and now it's gone all through the National Red Cross. So think about in your communities volunteering for helping in your community. Don't wait till the disaster hits, but get ready now. Get your church to be willing to be a shelter. Get your people in that church trained so that we don't have to go scrounging around for shelters when we need to.
That was not a planted question, Ed.
Yeah, and I do recall that you're an award winner at a national level, the American Red Cross.
Yes.
For the work done specifically on that program to train nurses across the United States, so one of our own.
And to her name is Cheryl Schmidt. To her point, is if you have skills, we'd love for you, because there is nothing more, I'll say, interesting than when there is a quake in Haiti or in Bandiachi, and we have people who call and say, I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, I'm a psychiatrist, and I want to go there, and we're like, we need you here. We need you here. So you can't go there if you haven't responded here. It doesn't just don't step out into the big stage like that. So yes, I saw a hand go up. Yes.
I can't tell you how helpful that map was. I don't know how many of you all that had your electricity out, but the map with the red and the green by street was enormously helpful. And I remember on Friday morning getting a phone call from a sibling who said, "Your power's back on." So that was very helpful. I don't know how you all managed to do that, but thank God for technology. I don't know if you want to comment that. I was going to ask Leo your thoughts on bundling.
Well, thank you. What I would say about that, we developed that back in 2009 and used it for the first time in the ice storm that was in North Arkansas, but have since added new features, a mobile feature on it. And when we opened up our walk-in customer information center in this last ice storm, what we found was all of the people who walked in there from all socioeconomic classes knew about the map, whether it was on the PC at the library or their friend's house or their own smart device. They knew about the map. And so then it became our challenge on how we communicate better on that map, whether using text devices, communicating down to the neighborhood. We're going to be in this neighborhood tomorrow or that neighborhood the next day. And, we just found that the more you communicate, whether it's via text, whether it's via any kind of social media, even robocalls, even though we got a little bit of criticism on robocalls, people wanted to know more information rather than less.
Well, you didn't create the storm, so I will tell you, it was amazing to watch the map, and just even, I think some of us watched as it would come down the neighborhood. You'd go, "It's coming down my street, it's coming down."
Okay. Can I ask of the crowd, how many looked at the map last night when the storms were blowing in? Yeah, okay.
Leo, I was going to ask you about bundling. A couple of weeks ago, I won't even say I guess it was last week, some of my service went out at home, and I started thinking about all this bundling. And is that bundling always a good thing when it just goes off? I wanted to hear your comments about
You said the bundling of
Just
like
like your
your
internet, your phone,
telecommunications,
and
of all your
everything is-
telecommunications
it's all cellular.
services, because man, I was dark, I was dark for 2 days.
I think as we've gone mobile, as I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes some thoughts of, I'm not here enough. People don't call me on my home phone enough for me to really have that service. As bundling is happening, a lot of the bundling products do use voice over IP. If you're talking about like bundling your cable service with, things like that. So I'm definitely not going to say it's a bad thing. I think it goes back to preparedness. So if you have a bundle and you have a voice over IP product at your house, obviously I don't think that replaces the opportunity for mobile devices that are not part of that same bundle. Obviously your cell phone service, regardless of who it's with, that's probably, even though it may be bundled from a billing perspective, if you lose your voice over IP service at home, that's really not going to affect your capability to use your mobile device. So I'm not at all going to say it's a bad thing, because I think there are some economic benefits. But it's something you have to look at. You have to make sure that you have a plan around your telecommunication services in any type of disaster.
Hello, my name is Greg Potter. I'm a first-year student here at the Clinton School. My question is actually to go off of the award-winning nurse over there. With volunteerism, we see a lot of times, at least in relief efforts, that the churches come out, and it's amazing to see the population of the churches come out to help. But is there anything in the ways of preparedness that, using technology, that we are compiling a database of volunteers to be ready for those when necessary?
And is your question having a church ready to assist in a disaster?
There is an organization called VOAD, Volunteers Active in Disasters, that tries to consolidate and coordinate all of the groups that are formed to go out and work disasters. So I don't know if that is where you were going, or I will say that without volunteers in this country, we wouldn't have a disaster response system. If you take away Red Cross, Salvation Army, volunteer firefighters, churches, all of those groups, we're sunk. So volunteerism is extremely important to our business.
And I would tell you, in my capacity as a board member of the American Red Cross, that is an ongoing mission. It's an ongoing effort to recruit volunteers to be prepared for, in the case of an event, that the Red Cross has a pool of resources to lean on.
I think there's a comment here. I'm Bill Branch. I'm with the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, and last Friday, the Arkansas VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, had a tabletop on the earthquake out at the Adam office and at the building there. So your Arkansas VOAD is active. It is, as you said, compiling a listing of the various kinds of resources that we have so that we will be able to respond at the time of a disaster.
Let me add to that, just say, obviously I'm going to be bullish on Red Cross, so I want everyone to volunteer, become trained to be a Red Cross volunteer. But having said that, whichever group you decide to volunteer with, I think that a lot of cities are becoming a little more sophisticated about using volunteers. And I say that whether it was Joplin or Tuscaloosa, Sandy Hook after the massacre there kind of took the same hook. Valonia did also. Having official groups of volunteers coming in. And the reason they do that is because when you have what we call the T-shirt disasters, where everybody wants to say they went, a city can be overwhelmed. And you're overwhelmed with people who have best intentions and big hearts, but they may not be providing the services that people need. And so a lot of cities have gotten to the point where now they're kind of stopping you at the city line, and they're having you register. And if you're not with an official group and you don't have an actual purpose, and you also have to think about, are you coming in prepared, back to the emergency kit, are you coming in with your own supplies and or are you going to be part of the disaster response yourself? And so good intentions mean that. So that's something to think about with friends and families and groups of, what is it we like to group? There are a lot of organizations that can address a lot of your interest. So you may not be the hardcore disaster person. You could be art. There are groups that go in and do art therapy. I'm sure you saw in Sandy Hook you had dog therapy. So that's some investigation you can do on the front end, as we say, before the next disaster happens. Yes. We have a question here too.
Another comment on that. I'm Casey Cochran with the Arkansas Department of Health. I do the Medical Reserve Corps program, and we actually have a database of volunteers, both medical and non-medical, for the state of Arkansas that we have started working on again. We've been in the process about 2.5 years working to build that in the state. So currently we have 10 units. And if you would like more information, but again, volunteering is so important, and we need volunteers in every county and every community.
I have this young lady in the red and black sweater here who's been most patient in raising her hand.
Mr. Maxwell, you said something about a financial impact of Katrina on the state of Arkansas. And since I'm not young, I don't understand what you meant.
Okay. And the impact actually wasn't on the state of Arkansas. It's money that flowed through us, federal money, sheltering, housing, Katrina evacuees. So yeah, some $68 million, something like that. It was a wash. Yeah, we rarely profit from disasters. I try and try and try.
I'll say, Hugh mentioned earlier about information and about their outage map, which I know I look at religiously when we have power interruptions, because it is informative. And the one thing we know that drives people crazy during a disaster is the not knowing. And that's why we are constantly asking you to get a weather radio, a NOAA weather radio, but also on your cell phone, when we talk about the apps, is getting that because it's getting information. How many of your cell phones went off with the piercing alarm last night when the tornado warning was issued? Okay. And that is pushed by, it's federal.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Okay, but it's a federal government program that is just starting. You tend to get it, I think, if your phone is 2 years or older. Although, I meant to say, someone did say, I won't say what, because I'll talk to you, but they get it on Verizon phone. We'll leave it at that. But that is something, and it's something to pay attention. If you don't have, I mean, you've got all the TV stations, radio stations. There's no reason not to have that, so that you know what's going on. Because, you know, if you lose power, or you're somewhere where, say, you can't get cell phone or whatever, you've got to know what's going on around you so that you know what may be coming at you again.
And that is a program that's been put in place over the last several years. It's been in the design for probably the last 5 years. It comes with 3 components, and one is Amber Alerts. The second one is weather alerts, like many of you received last night. And they're continuing to try and refine this down to where, you know, you have a large county like Pulaski County that in fact, hopefully in the future, it won't go to everybody in Pulaski County, but get more zip code specific. And when your cell phone is on the towers within that geography, then you'll get it, regardless of whether it's not by your home address, it's not by where you normally make calls. And the third component is a presidential announcement. So if the president determines that there's some event that he wants to make sure everybody in the country knows, or everybody in a state knows about, he can declare a message to go out to everybody within that geographic area. And you can turn 2 of them off. One would be Amber Alerts and weather. We do not recommend it. The phones come out of the box with them on. You will not have the ability to turn off the presidential announcement. So our recommendation is, as you're messing with your phones and you're playing with settings, that you do not turn off things that you don't know what they are, because if it's in some sort of notification type menu screen, you want those on.
Good point. Good point. Okay, I'm getting the signal from one last question, so you got to make it a doozy. Yes. Gentleman in the gray.
I have some other resources to help us help me and my wife to be best prepared should some type of emergency occur, really for the benefit of our kids, and that was alluded to earlier. But also, if there was some type of biohazard type event or something like that here in Little Rock, we live in West Little Rock, where do we find more information about how to best be prepared and take care of our little kiddos?
Ready.gov is an excellent site for a lot of information. I know Red Cross has a lot of information. The Arkansas Department of Health's website has some good information on diseases and bio stuff, and stuff that really goes, and so I would start with ready.gov and go from there. And you can always contact our office as well.
I would also encourage you to become first aid CPR trained, and if you have children, add that component to it. And we say that also at least one person in every household should be first aid trained, because depending on what a disaster is, not to mention just everyday occurrences, but you may be the person to kind of hold things in check until professionals can come to you. And depending on what may happen, the system may just be overwhelmed. In the instance of a Joplin, in the instance of a Tuscaloosa, where they are going to go to the most critically injured first. So that's something else that could put your mind at ease. And if you get our Red Cross app, we have a hurricane app, an earthquake app, and a wildfire app. And the hurricane app gives you weather warnings, but it's also embedded with the first aid app, which doesn't substitute for a course, but does that. And it actually also has ready.gov in it, too.
And Citizen Corps. explore that, and there's some good training that you might get your neighbors to be involved in as well, and my office can help with that.
We're behaving. That was the last question. Thank you guys so much, and thanks for the great questions and their interaction, and let's be safe and prepared.